This is Human Coined, a series that unpacks the mechanics of public finance, the complexities of democracy, and the societies they ultimately shape. I'm your host, Jeff Dubrow. Join me in a social dialogue that cracks open important issues that are too often ignored here at home and around the world. So I'm here with Mylene Despres and Carole Chan. Welcome to the series. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having us, Jeff. Thank you.
And I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself in a moment, but maybe we could just start with some context. We had a really interesting conversation with Manju Varma, the Commissioner for Systemic Racism for the province of New Brunswick. And a couple of issues that she raised that were really interesting. And one was very much about gender-based analysis plus and the need to expand the use of GBA plus in the province of New Brunswick. The other thing she talked about was the importance of acknowledging intersectionality. And that really is, I think, that different population groups experience programs, services, policies in different ways. And one of the reasons that I thought it would be great for us to talk is for you to maybe talk about how you experience, your lived experience, how you experience programs and services in different ways. So the purpose is really to hear from me less and more from you. So let's get started.
I guess I'll start introducing myself. My name is Carole Chan, and I have worked with Jeff a little bit over the years because of the space we find ourselves in. We've moved from cooler talk to actually doing projects together on GBA Plus because we've found common ground and common interests in that area. And I tend to be an actionist, so I don't just sit around the cooler and talk about it. We make things happen. Really pleased to be here, Jeff. And for those of you who don't know me, my past or my present is still as a regulatory lawyer, as a mom of 3 kids, and community builder.
Terrific.
Nice. So my name is Mylene Despres. I am the owner and CEO of La Station Workspace and La Station Creative. La Station Workspace is a space I created to help those in our community feel less siloed, people who want to change the world, but in any kind of capacity, whether it's professional or personal. It's a way to gather community in a professional setting, kind of like, and the cooler talk that Carole was just referring to, I like to call it like my organic networking. And so bringing back the cooler talk in a very organic way and about meaningful things.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I think it worked quite well.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're all here.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. So the lived experience, do you want to share some perspectives on how you see your intersectional group being, or from your own perspective, being affected by programs and services? Do you feel that they're geared towards you? Do you feel that they're geared towards other people? What would you like to share?
I guess I'll get started by saying intersectionality and the notion of GBA plus, even though we work on it now together, is an area that I have not spent a whole lot of my life thinking about. When I was growing up, now my dad's going to be like following this on the internet. But when I was growing up, I remember
Hi, Paul.
growing up in Vancouver, and as an Asian Canadian kid, first of all, not being very excited about being Asian Canadian, but also really having mixed feelings about my dad whenever he pointed out racism or something that impacted him in particular or our family, because I felt like I wasn't comfortable with that fight at the time. And it's something that I've grown into, I think. As I mentioned earlier when you and I were talking offline, Jeff, I think getting to a comfort level in my own life and in my own privilege, like collecting the privilege chips of being a lawyer, of being a known member in the community, accepted in the community. Once you're there, it's the opportunity to look back and see where you can help other people who were in the situation you were in. So it's a long preface to say I haven't thought a lot about it in the past, and appreciate the opportunity to think about it now, because it's also a pain point. I would say it's not something that a lot of people who are in the middle of it have time or inclination necessarily to think about. So when we're asking intersectional people or people who are intersectional minorities what their lived experiences are, if they're able to share with you, I would strongly recommend all of those who are privileged to listen well and listen intently, because everybody else is busy just trying to survive.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Mylene, did you want to talk about your perspective?
Yes. What was the question again?
Oh, just about the lived experience, about how you, sort of how do you see yourself, at what intersectionality do you see yourself?
Right. Well, growing up as a little gay kid in a very rural New Brunswick community wasn't easy, especially that our community and family were quite religious. And so I came out of the closet when I was 26 years old. And it was an uphill battle to get there. And so I my life before I came out, and I was privileged enough to have been able to afford going to therapy to deal with my issues and get to the bottom of things. And also privileged that it's a value that my mom instilled in us as kids, that therapy is for everyone. And so I do see that as a privilege, because that's why I was able to deal with everything that was going on. I don't think I'd be here today had I not been able to do that. And so, but still, I've had my share of homophobic thoughts and homophobic, and I say that, and most gay kids that were raised in religious households do have to deal with internalized homophobia for the rest of their lives. And so that's another thing that just compounds on you, the fact, you're taught as a child that being gay is perverted, being gay is wrong, it's a sin. Even that thing that Christians love to say but that I can't handle is love the sinner, hate the sin. Even that, I'm like, whoa, like my love for my wife is not in any way a sin, is the purest, most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. And so, yes. That answer?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we talk about GBA+, part of the idea behind it is that, as you know, is that when governments are developing policies and programs, they need to take into account how various population groups are affected. And I think when you and I were having, Mylene, an informal chat the other day, you were talking about heteronormality, which was very informative for me to understand that there's sort of sorry, you go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, no problem, yeah. So there's this, what we see in heteronormativity is, it's the idea, and I like to say cisgender and heteronormativity. So it's the idea that, and we've all been, socially, it's a social construct that white men who are straight and cisgender, so cisgender meaning that they identify with the same gender that they were assigned at birth. And so, it's like white, cisgender, straight men are the default, and everything else comes after. We're all, there's more things that were studied, like for medicine, for example. Medicine is historically and still presently incredibly racist, incredibly misogynistic, and a lot of women go to the doctor and aren't believed by their doctors, and even women doctors, because the way they were trained. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman who's a doctor. Oftentimes, a lot of women have to fight with their doctors to get this care they need. Now that gets even more complicated when they're people of color, It's a well-known well-known fact in the States that women of color, and even in Canada, women of color die more often during childbirth than white women. And so and here it's in the States it's Black women, and here it's primarily Indigenous women.
Right.
And so that's a problem. Like, why are these women dying in childbirth in 2022 of preventable things? Well, it's because the way our systems have trained our doctors is that, it used to be thought that Black people didn't experience pain as much as white people. Well, that's not true. That's not true, and it's still, but it is still, there's still remnants of that in our medical systems. And the remnants are very, they're very apparent. They're not just little dust bunnies in the closet, right?
Carole, did you want to add something to that? That was fascinating.
I think to bring it back to heteronormativity, where we're talking about the notion that the regular couple, the normal couple, is a man and a woman, a cisgendered man and a cisgendered woman. I think it does apply at the medical level in terms of what kind of advice you are getting from your practitioners as you become sexually active, as you become, just discovering yourself and mental health wise.
There was no sex ed for trans kids or LGBT, like any kind of LGBTQ kids when I was growing up. 0%, just man, woman, that's it.
Sure.
And then, as a very basic example, for instance, it's Christmas season, so Christmas concerts are going around right now, and and at our school, like many schools, they're limited in how many people they can welcome into the gym. So each child is allowed to have immediate family members, and the form that they send home includes the siblings of that child, and you check the box, and the mother of the child, or a assigned replacement for the mother, and the father of that child, or an assigned replacement. And it's a form. I understand they've got a bazillion things going on, and they provide for the notion that you can send somebody else if you have two mothers or two fathers. But the fact that the form is designed that way reflects the heteronormative structure that we have and that we instill in our children.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many forms I've seen that talk about man and woman or mother and father. And so for my wife and I, if we're to fill out any kind of paperwork regarding children of any kind, it often says mother, father instead of parent A, parent B. And so that is just, it's already hard enough. It's just like, it's a microaggression, it's a micro, it's sending the message that you still have to fight for representation, still have to fight for who your family is. But families have all shapes and sizes and looks, just like bodies.
Yeah. Go ahead, Carole.
I was just going to say, but for us to be sitting here and to be able to talk about it is already a step in the right direction, because when I think about, for instance, the oppression that my dad would have faced as an Asian person in the 60s in British Columbia, there were literally laws that didn't allow people who looked like us to exceed certain professions. We just weren't allowed. And so, or we were slowly coming out of that in the 60s. And so to be coming out of it to a point where you can publicly talk about it and not only expose your beef with the issue, but also expose your vulnerabilities for having experienced that, I think is a step in the right direction. I do think people are willing to talk about it more, but more importantly, I hope that more people are willing to listen and actually empathize and take that empathy and move it to action, because empathy's great, but if it doesn't do anything, it's just window dressing. So
And that was almost the next question I was going to ask was if you're talking to civil servants, for example, who are really doing their best to develop policies, and you say, by the way, your frame of reference in developing programs and policies is very heteronormative. What's the reaction going to be like? Is that something that is, you may not have had those conversations, but I think enough people and have spoken to enough people in the province, for example. Mm-hmm. Is there a receptiveness to considering that, we got to look at other lenses, for example?
I do have friends who were consulting the fertility clinic. They're a lesbian couple, and they were trying to conceive a baby. And when they got there, the nurse asked, "Who is going to be the mom?" So they were really taken aback by that, and it hurt because, they were both going to be moms. However, and it was, the nurse immediately felt ashamed, and she felt bad, and her question was, who's going to carry? And hopefully she's learned from that. But then 5 minutes after, the doctor asks, he wasn't asking, but he was talking about the sperm donor as the father. Mm-hmm. Words matter. Words have so much power, and so right then and there, they felt that they weren't seen, and they were the mom who wasn't going to carry was like, what's the word? I'm looking for?
Secondary in a sense.
Secondary,
yeah.
and her role wouldn't be as hard, and so and in the moment, they felt they couldn't talk about it because it was the doctor, and they didn't want their care to be not as good as if they had not said anything. But that would have never been asked to a hetero couple, right? That would have never ever occurred to them. But they did say something to that. Everybody who consults the fertility clinic has to go through a psychologist. And so they did say something to the psychologist, who said that they were going to talk to the clinic. And so I thought that was really positive and a great outcome for that. And the psychologist also they were like, make sure that anytime that there's a form that is not saying parent 1, parent 2, or whatever, say something. And so that they felt really reassured by that. So, but it happens all the time, all of the time.
That must be very difficult. And the thing is, I guess, I'm of Jewish faith, so I don't really consider myself to be mainstream in that sense. But nonetheless, of course, that's not something that's visible. And as a result, I guess a lot of my assumptions are going to be heteronormative as well, right? Yeah,
well, there's a term in the LGBTQ world that I absolutely hate, and a lot of LGBTQ people hate it as well, but it's still used in not just LGBTQ circles. It's called passing. So I'm passing straight. Sure.
Right.
So when you take one look at me, and so I find that incredibly insulting, because it is still it's still saying that the default is straight, right? It's still referring to that, and so you're a passing white guy.
Yep.
But that's insulting because it diminishes, or it's diminutive.
Sure.
Yeah, just minimizing.
On the other hand, I'm subject to incredible privilege, right? I travel the world on a Canadian passport. I'm never asked any questions. I sail through immigration anywhere in the world, and
I don't.
Right? Okay. Interesting.
I don't.
Interesting.
Because I can be perceived as brown, especially in the summer. I'm stopped at every single airport by security every single time.
Interesting.
And I'm still white, so I can't imagine what it's like to actually be a person of color traveling. That's a really great point. it's a fraction of what they go through. My tiny little experience is, it's a fraction.
Yeah. Anything to add, Carole? Don't
Can't
feel
exactly
obliged.
remember where we began on that. Oh yes, a government person presenting something that might not address the intersectional nature of my being. I think you have to pick your battles, like especially if you are a person who lives a bunch of minority intersectional pieces of your life. Like you only have 24 hours a day and so much energy and so much psychological energy to give to this.
But wouldn't you only be able to, not look the other way, but like pick your battles if you have enough privilege to do so? Because if we're talking about a trans kid who, trans kids are like 70% more likely to try or succeed at dying by suicide. 70%. That means 7 out of 10 trans kids will try or succeed to die by suicide. That's an incredibly grim statistic, but it is reality. Now that statistic decreases by 50% if they're accepted by their families. But if they're not accepted by their families and they're always fighting with who they are or about who they are because the society is made to be a certain way, they can't pick their battles. Everyone's a battle. Every one of them, I would think.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I feel that as somebody of color, for lack of a better term, I don't get to choose whether I pass or not. But I can pick when I affirm myself in that realm or not. For instance, in my law practice and also in my community work with the city, I'm not necessarily going to sit and watch every council meeting or read every last decision of the court or of the Law Society of New Brunswick. I will, however, when I interact professionally with them, expect a certain standard, which is what I've run into and had interesting experiences with, both positive and negative.
Right.
And that's where I'm comfortable and have the privilege. Yes, I do have the privilege to bound my interactions, but also make more impact, because I feel that if I'm doing it for just myself, it becomes about me. And it's very easy, no matter what level of intersectionality you're dealing with or what level of identity one is dealing with, to avoid the issue that is in question when it's about one person. When it is about a population, which is, I believe, the difference between GBA plus analysis as a tool for corporate entities or for government to make better decisions versus individuals making better decisions in their day-to-day interactions. That's a real distinction that needs to be made, because when I started with Jeff talking at the water cooler, and I have spoken to Manju about this, I've kind of had to wrap my head around, why do people need to be trained in GBA plus? It's like teaching people what they should be doing already, which is put yourself in somebody else's shoes, walk their life for like 5 seconds and think about it. But as organizations, if those individuals are already don't think that way, it is helpful to have a checkbox framework and training and all the stuff that comes with it to help that social mind shift that needs to happen, that we're hoping will happen, I think.
I think it is already happening. It's starting to.
Yeah, I mean, we're here, we're talking about it, which
Exactly,
is...
and we are seeing some forms be parent one, parent two.
Yes, yeah.
But
and it's not only about that. It's really about having people not even have to think about it anymore. And so training people to see others as humans first, and then perhaps your equal, is really a hard thing to do. Because I think I have 3 children, and if anyone has children, you'll know that the instinct of each child is to be like me first. That I deserve more, I deserve better, and some of them are able to stretch and be more generous and think about others, but it takes a while. It takes an education and upbringing to create empathy, to create an empathetic frame of mind. So if we're talking about corporate entities and government entities, yes, we do need frameworks like GBA Plus to facilitate that decision making.
And I think
Absolutely.
it's fair for people to understand that they don't have all the answers, right? That when they're developing,
100%.
yeah, that's really how I see it.
Neither of us do.
No.
Like, I'm still learning every day.
Yeah.
I'm learning right now. Like, it's
Absolutely.
and that's the beauty of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So knowing you don't, when you're developing policies and programs, that you don't have all the answers, you don't have all the perspectives, you do have certain biases and assumptions. I always say in conferences that I chair that, there's no magical line that you cross or threshold where you're now enlightened. It's a learning process every day to try to understand how and deepen the understanding of how people experience things, programs and services.
The more you learn, the more you know how much there is to learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I get questions a lot about, like, what if I mess up? What if I misgender somebody? What if I, right? People who want to do good, but just don't know how or where to start when it comes to the LGBTQ community. And so I always tell them, like, Google a few things and then have a conversation with, somebody who is safe, that has information. Like a lot of my friends come ask me all kinds of things, and then talk to people with lived experience. But also don't make them your only source of information, because it is not up to people of color and the LGBTQ community to educate the entire world on how to treat us.
Mm-hmm.
That's, we've had to learn how to live in this society that was constructed to not include us. So why shouldn't other people take it upon themselves on learning? And I think I see the shift. I see it happening more and more, actually. But it is Google. There's so many blogs and questions out there. Just Google. How to they, them, how to whatever.
And the challenge is that government departments are often very reticent to consult because it raises expectations, and it can be perceived to be spinning out of control.
Or that there's an agenda.
Or there's an agenda. Yeah.
That's what I feel like is the biggest issue right now, is people think that doing good or wanting to be more inclusive or more equitable as a community or in society, there's always people going to say that, that's leftist or whatever. And so the government's job, even though there's parties, is to stay nonpartisan still, is to stay, it should be anyway, to stay, what is best for the people. Not always reality, but.
Before we wrap up, I just want to go to the environment, social governance, the ESG component that we were talking about earlier.
Looked like she had something to say.
What's that?
She just looked like she had something to add to that.
Oh, did you want to add something, Carole?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, I guess just the question of, we're talking about government, but are there products and services that are put out by the private sector that you feel that are geared towards, for example, white men, and that
Have you ever bought women's razors?
I have not.
No?
No.
They're like twice the price as men's razors. They're for the exact same thing. A lot of women I know just buy men's razors. And that's the tip of the iceberg.
Well, let's keep going.
Shopping for, it comes from sanitary products to anything that's geared towards women. There's a term that was coined quite a few years ago. It's called pink washing. So as soon as you put something pink, it costs more money.
Right.
But if you look at clothing, women's clothing is more expensive for the exact same thing, but it's made 10 times cheaper. Not the same kind of denim, for example, not the same. We don't even have pockets in a lot of our clothing, right? And so but it's more expensive than a pair of men's pants that have great pockets. That's a detail, right? Like women's pockets are usually about this deep.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's,
I want you to come back to your mountain biking club if you can in a second.
Yeah,
But I
sure.
will add a small anecdote of my recent experience shopping for health insurance. I have one of those minds that goes to all the places that the salespeople are like, oh no, she's coming. she's a heavy, intense capacity
This
call.
is not going to be an easy sale.
But not an easy sale. But
It'd be a good one though, but
at least interesting. And
Yeah.
so my mind when I'm shopping around for insurance is what is insurance? Is basically we're all trying to put our money in a pot so that if something happens, the group provides for the individual. And how we decide how much money goes into the pot and what is insured is based on the statistics, the health statistics of the group that is being insured. And so if I'm looking for health insurance in Atlantic Canada, there are very few people who have exactly the same or even marginally the same genetics as I do, and even fitness, all that stuff, totally different backgrounds. And so it made me think twice about actually getting insurance, because I'm like, what if I actually asked if there were specific illnesses like sickle cell anemia for Black people, which would be excluded, and there was no answer that was necessary for me at the time. But it's not something that insurance companies necessarily think about or disclose even. Which is more serious when you're shopping around. And I think that's a really good example, though, of
absolutely
what product is relevant for certain people and what is not. And so I think Mylene's example of the Dusty Ladies Bike Club is a really great example of what you can do on the upside of that, because when you identify the gap, such as I've just talked about, what can a company or an enterprise do about it? They can either just keep it going as they are and understand that they're just excluding a whole portion of the market or poorly serving it, or they can do something about it. And maybe you can talk about the Dusty Ladies.
Yeah, well, in 2020, my wife and I founded a mountain biking club, a women's mountain biking club here in Moncton and in Moncton area called Les Dusty Ladies. And our biggest reason for doing it was because there was very few women that mountain bike that we knew of when we started mountain biking, because mountain bike was seen as a hardcore sport. And so if you look at basically the Canadian Sports Policy Foundation of participation in sports, inclusiveness and safety are two key values. Right. And so despite this, it's still incredibly broy out there on the mountain bike trails, or it was until recently. Mountain biking has increased in popularity 400% from 1987 to 2000. And now with COVID especially, we're seeing a lot more women on bikes. The Dusty Ladies within a year had about 300 members. I've biked with and women's groups all across the province and the Maritimes have exploded exponentially. We now have I think 10 in the province with a great participation, and it has a lot to do with how it was seen, right? And so in a survey that did, I think it was IMBA Canada, International Mountain Biking Association. They said that 20% of men versus 40%, 20% of women versus 20% of men thought that they were advanced riders. Simply not true. And then most of the men noted that they do it because they enjoy the risk. And so the perceived danger makes the perceived danger, because the media, the way that people talk about mountain biking has always been like, oh, it's about shredding and gnar and competition but it's actually really about community and enjoying yourself on a bike in the woods. It's not it's not, yes, it is still a sport, but it's not like the hardcore sport that is featured that's shown on TV. And so the way that we got so many members on board was, I'm not a racing person. I hate it. I'm team sloth all the way, doing it for the beer after, let's be real. And so we branded it and marketed it as a beer league. And so that removed a lot of barrier to entries to the sport for women and LGBTQ people as well, because it's not a competition. It's like let's just go have fun in the woods and tailgate after. Like, yeah, right?
What about us wine drinkers?
Yes. Accept it as well.
BYOB.
It is BYOB for the most part.
Okay.
And then usually, we have we even have a beer sponsor just to like bring the point home that, because a lot of clubs before or like weekly rides had bike shop sponsors, but that made it feel professional. And I remember going to shop for like my first mountain bike and my first parts and stuff like that. And I really noticed how incredibly bad bike shops were at selling bikes to women. We were always sold stuff that was cheaper and not actually meant for us. Like just, entry level, like, oh, you can follow your boyfriend with this, like, and that was really the mentality. But now, because of the Dusty Ladies, most bike shops in Moncton, at least, have told me about how many more bikes that they have sold to women, and like, not just entry level, but like real hefty mountain bikes that can,
hold up under scrutiny.
Pull up and take some shred and whatever. And they're astounded by the rise in sale, right? And so, another stat that I think is important. So 45% in that same survey by AIMBA Canada, 45% of men versus 28% of women said to have started at a very young age, started mountain biking. And so I don't know have you recently started a new hobby or sport, Jeff? It doesn't feel good when you're not very good at first. It's hard. And so that's another barrier to entry that there was perceived, like, oh, I can never follow you guys. I'm like, oh God, I'm the slowest one on the hill. I don't care. I'll be in the back. I'm mostly foraging for mushrooms anyway.
Especially if you're up against the gender stereotyping to begin with.
Exactly. But it took me 2 years to be able to ride with guys. Now, whatever, I'm like confident enough in my skills and what I'm doing to not let it get to me. But at the beginning, there was no way that I was going to ride with guys. It was too embarrassing, too like, oh, I'm just going to slow them down, la la. And so, but that's now with the uptake of women's groups, we're seeing hundreds more women on bikes. And what's cool about that is that when you get women, you get kids. That's Jackie Ancescu, who is an associate professor at UNB, always says that once you get women into a sport she's a kinesiology professor. So once you get people into a sport, or women into a sport, you'll get the community and you'll get the kids. And then the next generation of girls will be up there with the guys that started as kids. And so we're just at the tipping point of that right now. So it's the participating and the risk associated with these sports has made it a male dominated field, but it's not actually super realistic anymore. Like it's
a great, I was going to say anecdote. It's certainly more than an anecdote, a great story or a great example of what we're talking about, both from the media stereotyping, which we hadn't really talked about, which is an interesting perspective as well, right down to sort of how bikes are sold to women in stores.
Yeah, because gender has been socially constructed to discourage or keep women and girls from participating or even being physically literate, participating in sport or being physically literate. And so that translates into less women doing sports and less girls, especially, and girls being ashamed of being afraid of being laughed at on the hill or in the woods, but it's by including more women, that's how we, and having more, even people of color, like mountain biking is still a very white sport. And so it's really important to go out and follow people of color that are athletes as well, and like make sure that they feel invited to the table, just like we made sure that women felt invited to the table or to the bikes. Anyway.
We're just about out of time. Carole, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to address the notion of backlash, because I think that's really important when we're talking about progressive, quote unquote, progressive ideas of inclusivity and diversity, and mainstreaming it. I wanted to bring up two concepts. One of them, first of all, we discussed earlier, which is, gosh, Jeff, you're intersectional too. and I think having us all remember that we all have different aspects of us that, we share or don't share with other people. Sometimes we have the privilege to decide when we do.
That's a good way of putting it.
That is an important piece to keep in mind, so that everybody knows that this is for everybody, not just people who unfortunately can't hide behind, a skin color or whatever. So, or a paycheck. And so that I think is an important entry point for those people who don't identify as the most marginalized. They may identify with the privileged. And
that comes back to the pronoun pins and having pronouns. It's a way of signaling that you are a safe person and that people can, right?
Right.
Is that what you mean?
I think being an ally is important, but I would advocate for people who are allies or people who are privileged to consider their own vulnerabilities, because those of us who don't get to hide behind anything, and who finally make it to a place where we can talk about it, I think I like to think of a Chinese term called 忍耐, and that means to endure, and that's something that my mom and my mom's mom and everybody else just did all the time. They didn't sit around and talk about their identities or their things.
No,
they just endured and got through it and got to the next thing. And so for those people who may consider the affirmative action or GBA plus integration into policy decision making as being a soft way to accommodate people, I would argue the opposite, because I think that really those of us who are here and speaking about it, we're here because we toughed it through. We made it through despite everything else that was going on. And us making it through gives you the space to be vulnerable, gives you the space to address your own vulnerabilities and areas of your own identity that you may not be very certain about. And I think that makes us all richer and able to be more empathetic as well. So I did want to address that, because I fear with the fattiness of GBA plus, if it is a thing, that it comes and goes without actual integration into people's
such a good point.
Internalized thinking. And I think that the way to avoid it is to make sure that people understand this way of thinking opens things up for you to talk about yourself and to think about yourself in the greater whole.
Amazing conversation.
Yeah.
We could continue. If I don't stop it now, I think we could continue for another half hour very easily.
Yeah.
So we can always continue another time, but for now, let's call it a day. Mylene Despres and Carole Chan, thank you so much.
Thank you, merci.
Human Coined is an integral part of Nexus PFM Consulting. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also find us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions about the work we do, you can contact us at info@nexuspfm.com.